What's up, Tyler? Of
Hey Joe, thanks for having me.
course, of course. I'm a longtime fan, first time caller on this end, so I'm kind of reversing the roles in a way. Followed your work in the streaming world for quite a while, so it's finally good to chat.
Well,
So,
thank you. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
yeah, for people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Sure. My name's Tyler Akidau. I'm currently the CTO for Red Panda Data. We build a lot of very cool streaming infrastructure. Before that, I guess, giving my history of introduced as a streaming person, I've been doing streaming for close to 2 decades now. Started out at Google. Just happened to, when I joined Google Seattle back in 2008, they had just happened to start, sometime in the last 12 months, this very cool stream processing engine system called Millwheel. Wasn't on the team right away, but managed to get myself on the team as fast as I could, and just have kind of been doing that ever since. Had the opportunity as part of my tenure while I was at Google to write a couple blog posts for O'Reilly on streaming 101 and streaming 102. They ended up being really popular. Was able to write a book kind of continuation of that as a result after that, and then the rest is history. I've just been getting to do fun stuff in streaming ever since, so
Uh,
it's been a blast.
That's super cool. I think for the audience too, maybe walk them through I guess the history of streaming, at least it is when you jumped into it. So I feel like there's a bit of context that we need.
Yeah, sure. History of streaming, it goes back, it well predates me. There was a bunch of,
Yeah.
the way I'm actually trying to remember now. I think when we kind of landed, we were actually third wave in some sense. There
Interesting.
were there were multiple waves prior. The big one was in the early 2000s within the database community, because the database community has kind of explored everything at some point in time. The database community had this big push in research academia. How do we incorporate streaming? How do we, kind of real-time queries, streaming queries? And they did a bunch of great research. I don't think they opened up a bunch of new problems. They solved some problems. They never quite hit the nail on the head. There were a few companies that were spun off as a result, but it never gained huge traction. This would be kind of my take. And then, so things kind of died down for a little bit. And then around the mid 2000s, it started kind of coming back again. A lot of this was related to kind of the Hadoop big data stuff that was happening at the time. Hadoop was landing and hitting hard, and there was this desire to do lots of large scale data processing, but they were doing it with this batch stuff, and it was kind of like, this is great, but like, we're running this every hour or every day. Like, there's a bunch of use cases where I'd love to have my answers like right away, but no one, with the existing tech, it really wasn't feasible. And so then you started to have folks just kind of starting to build these systems that could do that. So Storm was, I think, probably the first one that really kind of took off and had traction. And their attitude at the time was like, well, if we want to do it faster, let's just like cut some corners, basically. Like, with Hadoop, you'd run Hadoop and you'd always get the right answer. Like, you could run it 10 times, it'd always give you the same answer. With Storm, they're kind of like, well, we'll just not worry about the consistency and the durability, and then we can move faster, right? And for certain use cases, that's totally fine. But it really, I think, hooked the industry on like this idea that you can move fast and like there is value in it. But then as you kind of try to mature it, it was like, well, geez, how can we use it? We can't use this for systems of record. We can't use this anywhere that we need like consistent results. And so then like, the system that I worked on, Millwheel at Google, and a lot of the other systems, and I think a lot of the path of the late, 2010 decade, the 2000s decade, was moving streaming into, let's be able to be fast, but also be strongly consistent. And so there was that was kind of what happened then. And then pushing up more into the later half of the twins, then you started, streaming had started to be kind of matured. And then it was kind of like, okay, now how do we actually make this thing easier to use?
Hmm.
And honestly, I think we've kind of been on that trajectory ever since of like, it's been, a lot of broadening of semantics and things you can do with it, but then a lot of like, it's still really hard to use and like really expensive. And you're always kind of balancing this tension of like, how much does it cost versus how fast is it? And so that's,
Hmm.
that's been kind of the space that everyone's been playing in for the last 5+ years, I would say.
What's hard about it right now, do you think?
That's a big answer. I think there's a few different things. One is if you look at open source stream processing, you at this point you kind of more or less like the heavy hitters are Flink and Spark, Spark streaming, and they've just been around for so long, and they're these Apache open source projects that they've just accumulated so much cruft in them over time. Like they become kitchen sink tools, right? Like you can do so much with them, but there's so much complexity. They've never been operationally super easy to use. Just kind of, it's never been a big selling point of streaming systems. They've always been kind of challenging. And that hasn't improved. I mean, it's improved some, but it hasn't improved a ton. And then conceptually, like even though you can do a lot with them, how you like the path to getting there is not always clear. Like they can be, they're kind of complex, or they have custom APIs or things like they can be challenged. So I think a lot of a lot of the progress that's been made on the ease of use front has been trying to remove operational boundaries as much as you can, operational barriers, I should say, like
Mm.
reduce the tax of running these things and try to lower the bar to entry to building streaming systems. And so I think that like the most successful approaches, I think, are if you look at systems like when I was at Snowflake, we build this thing called dynamic tables. Databricks has a thing called Delta Live tables. It's very similar. If you look at Materialize, they are effectively the same kind of a thing. It's like write a SQL query that takes some data sources, standard SQL gives you, you say in standard SQL, you say, this is what I want the output to look like. And the system just figures out how to do the rest. And ideally figures out how to do it incrementally. Because that's sort of the big divide, I think, between batch and stream processing is the real value from streaming comes when you can say, look, I have a data set. We computed some version of it, some transform version. Now a little bit of it has changed. We want to update that data set, but we really want to do work that's on order of the magnitude of the changes, not on order of the magnitude of the whole data set. We don't want to have to refresh the whole thing if we can help it. But that's hard. And so the more that you can build a system that says, look, you don't have to think about the incremental aspect or the deltas. You got your incoming data, you tell me what you want the output to look like, and I'll figure out how to make it work, incrementally under the covers. It just that turns it from you need a team of software engineers to build and run a Flink pipeline to like you can take any business analyst and they can write you a SQL query and click a button and off you go. And so I think that's really kind of the end game for stream processing of ease of use. If you can make it that accessible, then you've kind of won.
So does the ease of use then, does that more apply to the end user and abstracting away the complexity versus the complexity under the hood?
So it's
Because the
definitely,
under the hood stuff changed too.
I mean, the under the hood stuff, if anything, gets more complex, I think. But I think
Yeah.
that the the other piece of it is you need to abstract away the user interface, but you also have to abstract away or improve the operational aspects. And that's why if you look at kind of like the three systems I cited as like really good examples, all three of those are managed services that are offered. Like you can run Materialize too, but like you can't expect business analysts to run one of these systems, right? Like if you're going to run it yourself, you're going to need software engineers. And so I think the leap that had to be made to really make this more accessible is you need to make a system that is just so bulletproof that it can run as a service and it just works. Because then it's like, yes, I show up, anybody who can write SQL can sort of declare what they want their output to be, and everything else just happens.
Yeah, it's interesting. It does remind me a lot of the data warehousing tooling way back in the day, where there was just, I think, a lot of inherent complexity with that as well. It was a pain in the ass to set up, whether you're talking Hadoop or vendor service, right? And it was also expensive if you want to do it that way. It feels like, I would like your perspective on this. I always felt like this streaming is sort of where the batch analytics world was maybe 15, 20 years ago, and that the complexity is starting to be abstracted away ever slow, surely,
Yeah,
for the end user.
I think that's a fair take. I think the ease of use and the accessibility of it has always kind of lagged, but it's catching up. And I think we're going to get to a point where once you do catch up, then they kind of start to blend together more, which is
Yeah.
good because they're not actually that different, and it should feel cohesive and just like natural. But it has not felt that way for a long time.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that too. Did you, when you were at Google, did you work on Dataflow or Beam?
Yep. No, I started on the Millwheel team, and there we ended up getting consolidated under an org that had MapReduce in it. This project called Google Flume, which was kind of the
Right.
precursor to Beam. So this was all internal stuff at the time, and then it was I forget what the date was when it happened, but basically GCP happened, and they decided, okay, we're going to build a cloud, and so our group was the one who then spun off a bunch of people to work on what became Cloud Dataflow and Apache Beam. And so I was more focused on Millwheel at the time that happened, but I stayed fairly involved on the Dataflow and Beam side from the perspective of getting streaming semantics into it. Like
Got
we
it.
knew we wanted to do streaming in it, and I knew that we really needed to try to nail it, or at least kind of get what we had out there. And so I was very heavily involved in that, and was one of the folks who helped kick off the Beam project and things like that.
Interesting. Was it not originally intended to have streaming support?
It was intended, but what I would say is we were kind of figuring out the APIs as we went.
Okay.
We had built, if you look at Millwheel, which you could, the only thing you can do is look at the Millwheel paper, but we published a VLDP paper in 2013. If you look at the Millwheel paper from 2013, Millwheel was a very actor-based framework. It was more like more in the realm of something like Akka than in the realm of something like, or like, it's like Flink's, I forget what they're called, like the function API or something like that. Like it's, you basically define a little piece of code that gets, it's going to have an input port or input ports that you're going to get messages on. And you're basically writing a function that says, when you get an input, do some work. Maybe you've got the ability to manage some state, and then you've got the ability to produce outputs. And that was how you built pipelines. And so at the time that we did data flow, we were just starting to try to pull streaming into Google Flume. So Flume was, I'm going to have to take a step back or do more context. MapReduce was like the first thing that came out from Google. It was the thing that spawned Hadoop. Mapper and a reducer, like super simple, right? Like you write your mapping function, you write your reducer function. If you want to do complex pipelines, you've got to manually be like, okay, I want to do this set of operations. I'm going to turn this into like a mapper, then this reducer, then another mapper. It was hard to reason about. So the idea with Google Flume was let's build a higher level API that speaks in terms of data sets and transformations on those data sets. And then under the covers, we'll figure out what actual MapReduce operations occur. So this API looks a lot more like the when Spark, they have the data frames API, or Flink has similar APIs. So it's much more of a high level, like I got a collection of data, I'm going to do a group by on it, and then I'm going to do a filtering operation on it, and those kinds of things. So they had built that, and so we were actively working on getting streaming semantics into that. And for us, what this meant at the time, with our understanding of what streaming was at the time, was that we were trying to get windowing semantics and triggering semantics into it. So we were kind of like, we'd been building and designing that out, and it was just starting to land with our first internal customers at the time that we started Cloud Data Flow. And so we were all very much of the attitude, we're going to do streaming, but I really wanted to make sure that we took what we were building internally and got that in there and evolved it further as needed, because we had a little more flexibility with a brand new system to kind of add stuff in. So that was why I made sure that I stayed involved to get that in there, because those of us working on streaming were super passionate about it and really wanting to like it still felt so new, and it had not gained the traction that batch had, but we just knew that it was super valuable, and so we really wanted to like get it out there and see it be successful. And so that was why I inserted myself there. That was why I ended up, like, I started doing talks. We wrote I was the one who advocated for and wrote the Google Cloud Data Flow paper that was published at, I think,
Epic paper, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And it was because I wanted to sort of get our message across and get people to understand it. And that led to being able to do the O'Reilly blog post, which was awesome. And so it was really just this passion for like, we want to get this out there. And we were so jazzed about streaming that we wanted to make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think that paper is still one of the top papers I've read. I think it changed my perspective on data a lot when I read it, in the sense where it really felt, until then, there was the notions of Lambda architecture, which just felt odd, or Kappa, which also felt like it was a good idea, but not there at all. I'd say the discussion points on the different windowing techniques, the notion of unbounded and bounded data, I think was one of those things that just like really stuck to this day. And so thank you. It's good.
I'm glad. But, I felt like the unbounded bounded thing was huge. And then the windowing stuff was great. It's funny looking back now, because at this point in time, like, I just don't like, windowing is just not that important, would be my take now. Like, if I were to sort of tell people what streaming is or the right way to do streaming, like, I worked on streaming at Snowflake for 5.5 years, and like, windowing hardly came into the picture.
Interesting.
We built a very comprehensive and capable system, and like, windowing is such a small part of it. It's funny how much like that was such a huge part of like getting it into people's consciousness of like what streaming was, but it's also sort of like, as we've learned more and understood more about how you actually make this accessible, like how much that part has fallen by the wayside. But I think the unbounded and bounded stuff was also hugely important too.
Walk me through that then. So because I think that your thinking is, I think, at the forefront of, or streaming is, but with respect to windowing, what replaced that mental framework for you?
I think the thing that has shifted is that when we were back doing this, so I'll have to give a little more context here. So one of the things that popped up around this time, you're talking about Lambda architecture, Kappa architecture. One of the other things that was being discussed in this space was this idea of streams and tables.
Mm.
Streams and tables are kind of analogs of one another. I think there was, and there's some of that in the data flow model paper, but we had not really fully embraced that at Google at that point. And I think that's really where the like windowing being less important thing falls out. And it's the reason is if you're operating directly on streams, and if you're wanting to perform processing of streams, windowing is super important in that context because you've got the stream of data. If you're doing aggregations, for example, you need some way to sort of slice it up and say, I'm operating over this portion, and I want to reason about when this portion is done. I want to reason about like what goes into it. And I'm somehow trying to take the bits of the stream and put them together. When you're dealing with tables, you really you don't need to care so much about that stuff unless it's important to what you're actually wanting to compute. And so, you may be computing hourly windows and that's fine, but it's really just part of your data at that point in time. Like if you're writing a SQL query, you're just writing, well, I'm doing a group by and then I'm including the time in the group by because that's sort of the unit on which I'm aggregating. And so rather than having windowing being a first class primitive, it just sort of falls out that you describe your data in this table form the way that you want, and the system just kind of makes it happen however you want. And so where the windowing aspects are really important are in the tablescape case is really this small subset of use cases where you're needing to reason about completeness. So here I'm going to have to kind of jump and give a little more context for anybody who doesn't know, isn't deep on stream processing. Another big thing that we kind of went through with streaming in the 2010s was this idea of completeness, or like when do you have all the data for something? So if you're chopping data up into windows, but your data is arriving out of order, like coming from mobile phones or something, maybe you got people doing stuff on their phones, but they go on airplane mode for a bit and they upload events later. You kind of want to, if your group, you're saying, when are people actually doing stuff? What's their activity in this time range? You're wanting to actually group by those event times, right? Not by the time that you see the data. You need to deal with the fact that it's out of order. This was actually another big piece of kind of what we pushed through in the 2010s around streaming was getting people to understand this notion of processing time versus event time. And so if you're just landing data into a table and kind of accumulating those values over time, like you can just watch them grow and it doesn't really matter. You don't need to reason about completeness. The only time you need to care about it is if you need to give one answer and it has to be correct. So like you've got one chance to get it right, then you want to wait until you have all that data. And that's kind of like what the stream, if you're thinking about doing queries on streams, the naive way of building it is I'm doing a windowed aggregation. I want to give you one output for every hour. Like say I'm doing hourly. You then need some way of thinking about I'm waiting until that hour is ready and then I produce the output. But if you're just dumping it into a table and you're just querying, this is where we're at now, it doesn't matter. The other place where that's really important, which is, again, like it's a super cool use case, but it's not, again, it's really more this, like I need to give you one answer and it's got to be right, is like anomaly detection or something like that, where the lack of data is something you need to reason about. If imagine you're writing an anomaly detection algorithm, streaming one that's saying, I'm going to look at like user activity on my website or queries or something, and I want to send an alert if we have a model that says we expect that queries are going to be at like 10,000 per second or something usually. And if it goes down to 100 a second, maybe the system's down or maybe something's wrong. Like we should alert on that. You only really want to send an alert if you're fairly confident that for that interval that you're looking at, you actually don't have all the data. Because it may just be that it's in the queue somewhere and you need to process it, right? Like you're going to start out with a zero count. Like, is that an anomalous event? No, because you're starting to accumulate things. And so these sort of ways of reasoning about completeness are very useful for these alerting or I get one chance to give you an answer and I got to get it right types of use cases. But other than that, like when people are just dealing with tables, usually you can just shove data in there and it kind of evolves over time and it just makes the whole thing easier. You just don't have to worry about it. And so that's kind of what we found is like we were working on adding stuff at Snowflake about the time that I left, and maybe rolling out soon of around reasoning about completeness and data that won't change and data that you think is full, but like it's definitely more niche than it had
Yeah.
felt back, 10 years ago when we were first doing this stuff and very heavily focused on operating in the stream. I think stepping back and operating at the table level and trying to relegate the streams to implementation details as much as you can helps you get away from those more gnarly details.
Yeah, it seems like it. Do you feel like the table has really helped? I hate to use the word simplify, but I'll use it anyway. Do you feel like it simplified the ability to, I guess, again, simplify the user's experience with stream processing?
Absolutely, because like dealing with streams is tricky, and it's a different world and a different way of thinking about things, and it's fine, but it's so much more natural for people to just reason about tables. And so if you can kind of relegate that complexity to the system implementers, the hardcore streaming folks who are building this stuff, then that's just like great. They can geek out on that and do the right thing, and your business analyst can come along and just be like, I just want it to look like this, just make it happen, and I need it this fast.
Yeah. I mean, what is the goal for a good user experience with streaming?
I mean, my goal is that you don't know that you're doing streaming.
That's lovely.
You just say, I want to do this, and the system does it for you, which is really, really, like I said, what we were trying to get at with dynamic tables, and what I think all the systems kind of in that sphere are kind of getting at that to varying degrees.
Hmm.
And then if you there are times where you want to deal in the stream, like you need to sort of deal with the stream of changes directly, and that's fine. But if you do, you're probably a little more advanced, and
Right.
that's okay. But I think you can get so far by not dealing in the stream and letting these more advanced systems just deal with it for you under the covers.
Yeah, that's super cool. And now, kind of switching gears, we're all in the middle of an explosion of AI. Agents is the big thing of this year and probably next year as well. Where are you seeing AI and agentic AI playing a role in stream analytics?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think I'm going to answer it maybe differently than you're
Okay.
intending me to answer it. But what I would say is like the way I see it is more generally, if you think about, because let me start by saying how I use AI. Like for me, like I use ChatGPT constantly now, and it's just this like it's like this I guess everybody calls them copilots, but it really is like this copilot of like you're just like, oh, I got this idea. Let me bounce some help me poke holes in this. Like help me flesh this out. Like it's like you've got this really smart friend who just like loves chatting with you and hanging out and like helping you shape your ideas and helping you understand things and look things up for you, right? And so like that's been for me it's been just a material improvement in like how much I can get done and how effective I can be. And so where I think we're headed from streaming analytics and everything else is really just moving to a world where that's just kind of the norm of like anything where you're like, okay, normally I would sit down and be like, all right, what do I need to do here? How am I going to take care of this? Or here's something I need to do regularly. Like, there's a bunch of streaming analytics use cases that are kind of alerting or looking for anomalies or things. And you're sitting there trying to write this stuff up in code with agents, assuming that we solve this problem of learning how to deploy them effectively and safely and securely and manageably. I mean, we're just going to have a world where the workforce is maybe doesn't necessarily change from a human perspective. Your company had 100 before, you got 100 now, but you've also got like 10,000 or 100,000 AI agents who are helping you with all sorts of stuff. You can ask them to say, do this basically help automate this CI/CD task, or this like I'm overseeing builds or I'm diagnosing failures or things like that. Like help automate these tasks that are just like kind of take a lot of work and are really humans are effective at them, but they're not good at them. They're not like fast at it. And so really helping out with that stuff, but also inserting them into the actual business flows of like, we've
Hmm.
got this stream of usage coming. I've got an agent that literally just sits there all day long looking for anomalies. And then I've got an agent that sits there looking for like cases where we can like remarket to somebody effectively or things, like, and so that's kind of where I see it coming, and it's in my mind it just affects everything because they're so general purpose. They are like tiny packaged human brains that are just digitally plugged in. and currently, unfortunately, also a bit chaotic. So that's my long-winded kind of answer to that.
I do like it though. What were your first impressions when you started using ChatGPT?
I thought it was amazing. It was just incredible. Like it feels so like it just feels so human, like its ability to interact and its like understanding of things. And obviously there's tons of ways in which it falls short and clearly isn't human, but like it was that relatability, but also that just like it's so leveled up as far as its abilities in certain dimensions that like it's like having this superhuman friend that you can consult with. And it just blows my mind. And what's interesting is I feel like how long it's taken me to really start to utilize it so much. Like I've been using it for, I don't know, roughly a year at this point. But at first it was just kind of like hit or miss. But now like I'm seriously constantly like you get used to it and you sort of learn just how much value you can get from it. And you just it's just constantly there. So I don't see businesses continuing to operate the way they are once we figure out how to actually get this stuff out there. There's just no way. Like it can't. And
No, I
so
mean, I know I use it personally. I have different apps connected together via MCP. I just use Claude or ChatGPT as the interface between all the apps now, and I just say, get information from here, put it over, do something, plop it in here, whatever, and it's magic. My only problem is it times out a lot. So it says, I can't complete it, hit continue, it doesn't do anything. And like,
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
this thing's a piece of shit, but whatever. But it'll improve, right? That's just how it is. But it's magic for sure. What do you think? This is something I've been wondering myself. We've had these data architectures that so far have really been used to serve human needs, right? Analytics, figure out an answer to a business question, and so forth. But what do you foresee anything beyond that? It's maybe a bit more AI or agent first.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a big part of the direction of where we're headed with Red Panda, and I'm not going to go into it too deep. I know this isn't like a Red Panda pitch, but like,
No, go for it.
that's I think that's where things are headed, right? Like everything, you think about it, basically everything related to analytics and data and all that has been very human focused. And it's a very different set of interfaces and a very different set of needs. And if you're moving to an agentic world, I mean, they can move faster. They can juggle way more context in their head than any human can. And so there's just all sorts of things that you want to do to streamline that process. At the same time, as I mentioned, they are kind of untrusted and chaotic. Like I like the analogy I've been using. If you've ever played D&D or anyone out there, D&D has this like alignment grid, right? Where it's like the top left is like lawful good and the bottom right is chaotic evil. And then there's like, what is that? There's 9 of them, right? So it's like, lawful good, neutral good, blah, blah, blah. You think about like how we approach like hiring at businesses. Like there's this long interview process. The focus is really like we're trying to get as many lawful goods as we can. Like you really want the lawful good people.
Yes.
And realistically, you end up with, I think, the top left of the quadrant. So you get somewhere between lawful good and true neutral. And then, and maybe in various tech circles, you end up with a fair number of chaotic good folks. But like, that's kind of where people end up staying. And if they fall too far out of that, they're going to get let go. You think about AI agents, at least today, they're pretty much solid in that chaotic column. Like, and like all the guardrails and all the training is trying to push them up to the chaotic good side, but like they are absolutely chaotic. And so that's I think the other big piece that we haven't solved yet. And we the industry are going to try to solve it from 2 directions. One is trying to figure out how to make these models more and more consistently from a personality perspective up in that chaotic, actually to the lawful good. Like that's really the goal, is to move everyone up to lawful good, or all the agents up to lawful good. But like, so the model companies are going to work towards that over time. But then kind of the rest of us who are looking at how do you deploy this stuff, whether it's in your own home, but especially if it's in your enterprise, how do we safeguard against this? It really comes down to like, you've got to narrow their access to things as much as you can. You've got to audit everything fully. Like you think about historically, for important actions to user data or private data, whatever, we've historically logged metadata accesses. Like we track this person accessed here, whatever, but you don't track the actual data. You're just sort of trying to make sure who did something at some point in time. But with AI agents, like you can't debug these things. You can't go and inspect the code, right? Like they're just these complex models that have been built up through all these training exercises. And so if you want to actually sort of diagnose like what made it go do this amazing thing or this terrible thing, you actually have to record all of the data. Like you really need to audit everything. And so I think we're kind of heading in that direction of like, how do you narrow their access? How do you record everything? How do you, really put them in a box that allows them to do what they need to do? But when you give them a prompt that makes them think, okay, well, I'm very clever and I actually know how the Linux kernel works and where all this stuff works, and I can circumvent this and somehow, I can break out of my jail and go do this thing and I will achieve what you asked, but I've, deleted half your databases as part of it. Like you can keep that sort of stuff from happening, right? That's kind of, I think, what the direction is headed to try to get this stuff out there and realize it more in the workforce.
It's a big undertaking, though. I mean, I always ask myself, would I be willing to let agents just run free on my computer right now? Right, and it's kind of like I love the chaotic grid too, because it's kind of like I feel like because it was based, especially these LLMs, they're basically trying on Reddit, Twitter, so it's like they're basically born juvenile delinquents, and then you have to do it in reverse. Like, okay, I know that you've had a horrible childhood, but we're gonna make you a better person, I swear. But then there's always that criminal sense, like the Riddler or the Joker or something in the back. Like, well, yeah, that's nice,
Yeah.
except not today.
Yep.
But you see this in those papers on the misalignment problem, right? Where I don't know if you're familiar with that, but the Anthropic has a series of papers where they do research on these LLMs, and there's some pretty deviant behavior they'll do. If you threaten to pull the plug, they'll be like, well. Yeah, okay, you're not going to. I'm sorry. And I'm gonna make your life living hell if you try and do that. Like the one with the fake software engineer who had the fake affair, like that kind of stuff. So
Yes.
it's fascinating. But you're absolutely right. Like, because my litmus test is again, like, would I put this on my computer right now? Absolutely not. Like, not sight unseen. Like, I just run stuff maybe in a sandbox. But for enterprises where there's a lot at stake, that's I yeah. I mean, I see reports of companies saying we've unleashed agents in our company, and I think, okay, that's great. I hope that there's guardrails here because I always joke that I think the like Armageddon's going to happen because fleets of agents do like drop database collectively on like every corporate system and government system in the world simultaneously, and it's just like everything's gone, and that's it. So, but hope not.
Yeah, no, it's very much kind of a horrifying thought of like, yeah, if you let them loose today without structure, you're asking for trouble. And so
Which
that's
is funny because Claude just opened up the MCP window right as I just talked, just coincidentally. Anyway, go on.
it's listening. It hears you.
And your computer's gone. So, sorry, what were you saying?
I think it's yeah, it's just we see this. I definitely see this with enterprises that they're struggling to adopt AI, and I think this is really the problem. Is how do they do it safely? And it's not a solved problem yet, and I think it's a very interesting problem to try to solve.
Whose responsibility is that? Would that be Red Panda's responsibility or the model makers or who?
I mean, honestly, I think it's whoever decides to go and solve it. But
Mm,
we definitely, I think, from a Red Panda perspective, I think we see a lot of similarities between kind of what it feels like is going to be the right way to govern and manage these agents with kind of how event-based streaming systems have been built in the past. And I think we see a lot of benefits to the tech that Red Panda is built on as being a part of that. So that's kind of why we're heading in this direction. But like,
mm,
the OpenAIs and the Anthropics are going to try to solve this too. And there's like hundreds of startups out there with ridiculous amounts of funding and a bunch of 20-year-olds working 100 hours a week that are also working on that. So,
right.
it's anybody's game. But I
Yeah.
think, the reason why we're willing to invest so heavily is that we do feel like it just feels like it's kind of in that same ballpark of problems, and we can apply
Yeah.
the stuff, the expertise that we have and the technology that we've built to it effectively.
So you're looking at your play as being more of the backbone that services the real time infrastructure of this.
Basically, yeah, the agentic data plane, I think, is how I would
Yeah,
pitch it of
that's a good
like,
way of putting it.
yeah. So yeah, I think it's exciting and it's fun for me. Being like it reminds me of, back in like 2010 when we were like trying to figure out what the hell streaming was, kind of figuring it out as we went, right? And there's a lot of open problems, but it's super exciting, and you're like, you can tell there's just feeling in the air of like this is so important, there's so much value here, and people don't know the answers. So like, let's go be a part of figuring out the answers. And so it's kind of fun to feel like I'm back in the net because having done streaming for like 15 plus years, however whatever it's been, you get to a point where it's just kind of like, yeah, I've done this, I know this. Like you don't feel like you see new stuff too frequently, right? And you're sort of, it's fun that you're kind of finishing out the breadth of like solving all the interesting side problems and side quests. It's like you're like heading to, you're trying to 100% the game basically, and I feel like we've like 90% of the streaming game or something at this point, and 95%. And while I'd love to get it to 100%, it's kind of fun to be like, oh, there's a new game. This is this one, and nobody's past 10% on this one. So like, let's all go hack at it and see.
If you were to talk to younger Tyler, if younger Tyler was coming up today, what advice would you give your version of yourself starting out in today's world?
Oh my God. Good luck. I don't know. Like it's hard. I mean, I honestly I don't even know that I feel qualified to give advice. Like the world is so different. That's really my
Yeah.
attitude. Like I would say trust yourself, do the best you can, lean as much as you can into AI and leveraging it, but understanding its weaknesses and how you can utilize it effectively, but also help the world utilize it well going forward. Because that's just it's going to be the wave of the future. I just don't see how it can't be. It's that transformative. So that would be my advice, but that's the best I can do. It's funny how I feel like a dinosaur at this point. Like, and in some senses, we're all dinosaurs. Like, no, none of us know what the hell's going on here. We're all at the cusp of it. So I don't feel like I'm necessarily more wiser than a 20-year-old out of college as far as that goes, because like all bets are off.
That's actually really good framing. And the reason I asked that question, I was just asked that on a podcast I just did a second ago, but and I felt the same way. Like I was like, I can give you advice, like build your network of friends who can help you in your life and stuff, and continuously learn. But at the same time, it feels like a reset button has been hit on everything, and we're all kind of starting over in a lot of ways, for better or for worse. So, um, yeah, I don't know either. I'm like, just learn AI, I guess, or learn to farm. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Go play games. Join a band. I don't know. So that's fun. Are you a big gamer?
I'm not a big gamer. I just don't have time for it. But I do, I do enjoy games. And particularly games where I can play with my kids.
Oh, that's cool.
And like I would say, my top game of all time is probably Enter the Gungeon because I can co-op with my daughter, and it's such a ridiculous and deep game. Given how superficially it doesn't look that deep, but it's just it's a super fun one. I played a bunch of Elden Ring in the last year, and we're a big Stardew Valley family. But that's like my gaming starts to trickle off after that. Like I just don't have the time.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Used to be a big video gamer, but not so much anymore. Got much going on. Um, Kind of closing out. Like, what are you excited about over the maybe over the next year?
I'm really excited about this agentic AI stuff and where we're
Okay.
going at Red Panda and where it's all going. I'll be honest, like when I joined Red Panda, like we had just closed our Series D a month prior to me joining, and like the press release was focused on agentic AI, and I've historically been an AI cynic. It may not seem like it from everything I've said in this podcast, but like I've long been one of those people like, yeah, whatever. And everybody's throwing money at AI, so it just feels like such a bubble. But at the same time, so going into Red Panda, knowing that the company was shifting towards AI, I was a bit skeptical myself still. But like having really dug in and sort of seeing where we're going and being able to churn through in my mind more like just how impactful this stuff could be and feel like I have a better sense of like what are the problems we need to solve and having them feel tractable and like something that we can actually materially contribute to and that I can help with. I'm super excited about it. So it'll be interesting. It'll be fun. Like I said, it feels like back in 2010 when we were just doing streaming at the start. Like we're kind of figuring out as we go, and it's a fun place to be once you can kind of accept that like you're dealing with a lot of unknowns.
Oh yeah, and I imagine it's fun for Alex and the crew at Red Panda as well, because I know that they've been the streaming platform space for a long time, and now it's reset button's been hit on that too. So how do we think about what's next for that, with agentic and so forth? So it feels like it's not just people, but the companies themselves are having to reorient their framing of how they can work in this new world. So it's pretty cool. Yeah. Well, awesome. If you want to learn more about you, how can they find you?
That is a good question. I kind of fell off the face of the earth for a bit when I was at Snowflake. There just wasn't this like need to get out and talk and whatnot. But I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on X/Twitter, I'm technically on Blue Sky. But I my presence will be ramping up sooner. It's LinkedIn. It's all Takido, Takidau. So LinkedIn/Takido, X.com/Takido, Blue Sky/Takido.
TikTok? I'm kidding.
I am on YouTube, I think, but I will occasionally post like conference videos if I get
Okay.
them, but I don't actually do any content there myself. So, but
Got it.
you can expect to see stuff showing up in LinkedIn and X and Blue Sky coming soon. We're ramping up here.
Awesome. Tyler, it's great to chat with you, and great to finally meet you as well.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This
Thanks a
was
lot,
really
man.
fun.
Yeah, of course. Take care.
Thanks.